The first book I read was The Hate You Give by Angie Thomas. It's told in first person from the perspective of Star, a 16-year-old African American girl, and the story begins when Star witnesses her friend Khalil be murdered by a police officer. And after that, we follow Star as she navigates her own grief and also has to sort of like be in the public eye, like as a witness, and has to fight for justice for Khalil because he was murdered by a police officer and the police officer is not being held accountable for it. Race is a huge theme in the story, and it's very topical, of course, because right now we have the Black Lives Matter movement happening, and a lot of racism in the system is like coming to the surface, and we're starting to really see it pretty blatantly. With police brutality and the unjust incarceration and killing of Black people that we've seen in recent years. And the story also is about identity. Star is kind of like in the middle of two identities. She's from a predominantly Black neighborhood called Garden Heights, but she goes to school in a neighborhood of mostly white kids. And she feels like she can't be her true self at the white school. There's a moment in the book where she talks about how her classmates can use slang words and it makes them cool, but if she uses slang words, it makes her hood. And so she also can't talk about the murder with her white friends, even though it was like the biggest event in her life and has impacted her on like such a traumatic level, because they wouldn't understand her, or she's worried that they would just like think of her as like another Black kid from this neighborhood and like not think of her as her, like just think, oh, like that happens and whatever. What I like about this book is how it explores so many relationships. There are a lot of characters, and she has a very different relationship with each of them, but it kind of, we see different sides of her because of these relationships and like how she handles them. So she has her parents, her white friends, her Black friends, her siblings. One of her uncles is a police officer, which kind of like a police officer who worked with the one who killed her friend, which is an interesting um, relationship there, like an interesting conflict. And overall, I think it dealt with the subject in a way that was both like very serious and eye-opening. It played with your emotions, but there was also a lot of humor in this book, which I enjoyed, and I definitely recommend it. The second book I read was Radio Silence by Alice Oseman. It's about a high school girl named Frances who is obsessed with this podcast called Universe City. It's like her whole life, all she does is listen to this podcast and draw fan art for it. And the people who work for the podcast notice her fan art online, and they reach out to her and ask her if she wants to help and like collaborate in projects together. And that's sort of where the story begins. And then she realizes that the person who runs this podcast may be someone she knows in real life. And one of the major ideas explored in this book is higher education. The characters are in high school, and they're really feeling the pressure to get really great SAT scores and get into the best colleges and like interview for colleges and know exactly what they're going to do and like be the highest achievers that they can. But they're all kind of miserable because of this and unhappy, and no one knows what they really want because they're kind of being told what they want, which I think is super relatable for high school kids and even college kids. It can be stressful to like, because we want to do the right thing and like make sure that we're like achieving at the highest level, but we sometimes don't put our happiness first or like what we're interested in first. So that's one of the major themes of the story, is like understanding that there's no one right way to do things and that like everyone's futures look different and that's okay. Another thing I loved about the story and I thought was really interesting was, I mean, there's a boy and a girl main character, so I'm like, okay, there's probably going to be some love there. But I loved how there was no romance and how these two characters were obsessed with each other, but like in a friend way. Like they just thought that the other person was like the coolest person in the world, and I thought that was a cool kind of like relationship to explore. There's no pressure to like ask someone out on a date or like make any first moves. It was just purely friendship, and it was such a pure book. And I know I felt a lot of emotions reading it. It was very good. The final book I read was The Perks of Being a Wallflower. It's about a freshman in high school named Charlie and his relationship with two seniors, Sam and Patrick. The book is told in a letter format, so it's like he's writing letters to somebody and then mailing them. And I think this is a great way of telling a story because it allows the narrator to be really intimate with the reader. He's telling us all of his thoughts and all of his secrets, and we get to see the way he thinks and the way he observes the world, which I think is really cool and interesting. There are a lot of themes of mental health and like trauma slash abuse in the story, and it also explores relationships and like a lot of YA novels do this, but like relationships for the first time. So like experiencing romantic relationships or like intimate feelings, but also friendships. And I really liked the protagonist just because he was so observant and he had a really sort of quirky worldview. So I thought that was refreshing to read, and yeah, it was a fun read.